All right. Welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of Seize the Moment podcast. Today's our annual Thanksgiving episode, special episode, solo episode from me and Leon. I guess I wanted to open it up with how you doing, Leon? How's everything?
Good, man. Chilling.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, same here. Oh, okay. End of podcast. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's cool.
Well, I'm waiting
That's
for you
cool.
to finish your introduction.
No. That's it. I mean, it's been a pretty crazy year as far as that goes. In terms of COVID.
Mhm.
Um, Before that, Black Lives Matter riots and stuff like that. George Floyd, transition of power from Trump to Biden,
Mhm.
right? Um, People on the left screaming this, people on the right screaming that. And it's very general, but it's been a little bit of a rough year with the pandemic. People working remotely, people losing their jobs, companies going out of business. Um, but yeah, man, it looks like we're kind of getting back to some sort of semblance of normalcy, right? With the vaccine, um, and things of that nature. I don't know, like, how do you feel about the past year?
Oh man, what a fucking question. So it's been interesting. So definitely nothing sort of terrible from my end. Obviously thankful for that. I mean, look, in a lot of ways I've benefited. So it's hard for me to really complain. But obviously, you can kind of see what it's like for other people, and sort of feel sad. Obviously. Um, So yeah, I mean, I can't complain. So it's hard for me to really even comment on it because honestly, if anything, I would say my life has gotten kind of better. So, I don't,
That's
yeah.
good. In what way? What do you mean?
Well, so
Like in terms
business,
of patients
yeah,
and stuff?
yeah, business wise, things have gotten better because I don't have the overhead of office space for the office space rent anymore, which is obviously pretty great. In terms of like the number of clients who are reaching out to me and trying obviously to well, to see a therapist and to start therapy, that's been like exponentially better than it was before. So yeah, truly, man. I mean, it's been fine. And it sucks to say, obviously, because so many people have struggled. But yeah, really no complaints. And it's nice that everything is going back to normal. I'm not planning on ever going back to the office. So yeah. So,
No, that's good. I mean, listen, hey, I mean, we learned some lessons, right, from the past year, especially in terms of what can you do in terms of remote work, right? Like, for example, for you, you're still able to see your patients, perhaps even take on more patients because
right.
you're not limited to going to an office setting and that patient having to meet you there.
Yeah.
There's
But the
another
other
set.
and the other thing is too, you get a schedule too, man. Like when you rent office space, you can't just come in and show up whenever you want. There's an agreement, there's a contract. So the thing is, there is no contract now. I could kind of just make my hours as I choose. Whereas before, where I was renting space, there's just no need to.
Yeah, like this, you have more control. You have more,
Yeah.
what's it called? Sovereignty, right? Over your
Mm-hmm.
own business,
Right. Right.
right? You still have to deal with insurance companies and all of that,
That's
but
always.
it's fine. There's more of a sense of control, which is cool.
Yeah.
Another thing I like, and I'm sure you'd agree, is that the patients probably are more likely to show up, right? Am I wrong about
Yeah.
that? Like,
No, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Just because like it can be done from anywhere. So even if they go on vacation, we'll still have sessions.
so arguably, this might be a net positive. Well, okay, actually,
That's why
I
it's
have
hard
to.
for me to. That's for why it's hard for me to talk about this. It's like because people are gonna look at this and be like, "Oh wow, like fuck that guy," and I totally get that, right? So that's why I'm like, that's not even really a question I necessarily wanted to answer. That's why I'm like, I'm doing fine.
I mean, that's cool. I mean, that in that sense, that's good that at least you're taking the perspective of what other people might feel about something like that. Yeah, I mean, for me, I had a mix of things happen, right? So my not to get too much into it, but my father, for example, had COVID. And if he didn't have intervention from hospital, he could have died, and stuff
Right.
like that. And it was a really, at the time, a very gripping, powerful thing that was happening,
Mhm.
and it wasn't a joke, right? I mean, some people had taken the perspective that, all right, guys, like really seriously, everybody mask up, 6 feet away. Please, do your best to adhere to CDC guidelines and guidelines from your from authorities, right? And I was definitely all about that. but I felt like at as time was going on, we were so lucky. Nothing had happened up until the point where he got sick. And then when he did, this became like I started to imagine what other people were going through, right? In terms of that. I mean, in terms of our guests too, right? I mean, different people were, I mean, I wouldn't say anybody reported to us anything too bad in terms of our guests, but a lot of times we'll talk to them right before they come on, and we ask them, how they're doing, and
Most of them
um,
have been doing pretty well. I don't even remember a person saying one bad thing. I mean, outside of just like, loneliness and I guess some form of isolation or some level of it. I mean, everybody seems to have been doing okay from our end.
Gotcha. But yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah, that was actually a big thing, a glaring sort of commonality
Hmm.
amongst everybody. Yeah, that there was sort of that feeling of isolation. Um, I mean, I guess since we're on the topic, I mean, for me too, actually. I mean, even though, with us and our friends, we kept up with doing like Zoom meetings and stuff
Hmm.
like that from time to time in the beginning of this thing. That was cool, right? And I'm with it. In fact, some of that stuff actually felt like a different sort of bonding experience.
Hmm.
Call it trauma bonding, call it whatever you like. A lot of people probably would call it trauma bonding, but right, things like that were really valuable. But I'll say, even just that sense of isolation, the fact that you had to stay 6 feet away from people, and especially in the beginning of this thing when we had close to no information or just very little information, when I was walking around outside with people or next to people, I couldn't be next to people. Actually, even I was paranoid. I was, not because I was afraid I would get something, although to some degree maybe I was.
Hmm.
uh there was another level of it too where I'm thinking, oh my god, I don't want that person to feel uncomfortable. And it kind of would put me really in my head and set a weird precedent for the next several months of how interactions would go with people outside. And then even when we were able to go back out and there was that semblance of normalcy kind of happening,
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, now I feel better. I feel a little bit better now, but I'd
Hmm.
be lying if I said there's not I don't still have some kind of weird thing where I'm even either subconsciously or unconsciously sort of trying to process like what is that person's comfort in relation to me, but in terms of like from that COVID filter.
Hmm.
How you, what you think about that? But
Well, it's interesting what I was thinking about, like in terms of how, obviously we've been, I mean, since day one, we podcast through Zoom. It's kind of interesting how like Zoom became normalized. So when we started having shows with people, it was like, oh, this just feels like I'm like talking to some friend or whatever over Zoom. So it's like as we went through the year from 2020, obviously to now, but I mean, we were doing it before. But like before, it was kind of weird not to have people in studio where you're kind of like, oh, I mean, Zoom conversation sort of strange, I guess, because you're so far away from the person. There's this like a level of intimacy or layer of intimacy that's a bit removed. But then like now as you're talking to people on Zoom, right, it feels so normalized that it doesn't feel like there can even be an added layer of intimacy. Did you get that too?
I know what you mean. It
Hmm.
because it felt like an acceptable form of
Yeah,
communication.
yeah, 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 yeah. So
Um,
it didn't feel like we were filming anymore. It just felt like, oh, we're just talking to like some friend or whatever acquaintance that we know, right?
it's interesting. I would say this though, even when we started with Zoom or actually Skype, technically, um, you're right. There was that thing of where we kept comparing it to the other experience, right, of being
Hmm.
in person. Um, but I feel like we still did establish rapport and had good times with people that we had on
Hmm.
before this became like a thing. But
Yeah.
after it became a thing, you're right. Yeah, there was some sense of even more comfort,
Yeah, yeah.
because it felt like now what the other person's thinking as well in terms
Hmm.
of like our guests probably, of course, they prefer to do via Zoom. Yeah.
Well, and it's also like all of us are literally just zooming with each other anyway. So you know what I think it is? It's like before there was this sort of I don't know if regret is the right word, but there was this thinking like, oh man, I wish this person were here in person, right? Like this would be better with that.
Yeah.
But now, like now that everything is through Zoom, you're like, oh, who cares? I don't need him or her, whomever in person, right? It makes no difference. Everybody's through Zoom. So it just felt like because this is the established mode of communication, like the main form of communication, now it just feels like, oh, we're just having a normal conversation as we would like any day. Like if literally we weren't recording, we would be doing the same thing. So whereas like, there's kind of like this FOMO when before like the Zoom meetings where you were like, oh man, like what would it be like to actually have this person here live? And now, right now, thinking about it in in terms of like, oh, everybody's, doing Zoom. Now it doesn't feel like a sense of FOMO anymore. Now it really feels like, oh, like this is like the legitimate way that everybody's kind of like talking to each other and getting to know each other, meeting even each other, right? Like, so it just doesn't feel, I guess, yeah, because FOMO is a big thing for me. I guess with COVID and having people through Zoom, I was like, oh, I don't have to feel FOMO anymore. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of even things I would listen to, let's say the radio,
Mhm.
when I heard those radio hosts get very used to like working from home, right?
Right.
Almost preferring to stay home instead of commuting to go do radio. If you could do it over the phone or over the internet from online,
Right.
why do you need to go somewhere else?
Mhm.
But
Well, wait, I
then
do have a question for you.
yeah.
Do you feel that in some way, like going through just the experience of COVID and everything that happened, do you feel like some of the interviews that we had in this past year were somehow shaped or were even better than they would have been had we not had them during COVID?
Okay, actually, I'm happy you said that. I was thinking something similar earlier.
Mm.
So actually, it's possible that we might not have even gotten those interviews,
Yeah, totally.
right? I mean, technically speaking, if you're out and about, you have to be maybe in a different state. You have to maybe go somewhere else for work or whatever one of our guests was doing. Yeah, it's possible they might not have had the time to be a guest on the show,
Right.
but because of this, a lot of people benefited from hearing their voice, right, and what they had to say, probably more likely than they would have if they had been busier. That's probably true, not even just for our podcast,
Mhm.
but all sorts of podcasts. I mean, I like I think was Chomsky on Kaufman's podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they did it via Zoom, if
Oh,
I'm
of
not
course. Well,
mistaken.
Scott does everything via Zoom.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, Chomsky's a busy man, so I guess maybe it goes back to an earlier point. But yeah, I mean, imagine a guest who is anyway sort of older, has a lot of wisdom, but
Mhm.
it's harder for them to travel. But then
Right.
Zoom became an acceptable form of communication.
Mhm.
Maybe because I know, for example, in the beginning of this, Rogan, for example, when would have certain guests on, they came on via Zoom.
Mhm.
He actually expressed that he doesn't like Zoom, and
Okay.
I completely get why. It's
Mm.
uh, a lot of times it is easier to establish rapport, feel out what the other person is trying to say. There's no lag issues that could
Right.
appear,
Yeah.
you name it, right? But yeah, I'm sure some of the people that he had on may not have come on otherwise. And then I'm sure it's true for other podcasts, Lex Friedman, for example, too.
Right.
So yeah, it's great. It's a great advantage.
But I also kind
Yeah.
of felt like there was a sense of gratitude that might have not been there otherwise, like from
What do
our
you mean?
guests. So I mean, look, and obviously I can't really be in anybody's head, so I can't say for sure what someone would have or wouldn't have thought. But I did sense, and then this is like a vague feeling, but I did sense like over the year, there was, but maybe a little bit more of a sense of gratitude that people were on our podcast as opposed to the year before. Not to say that it wasn't there, or not even to say that like people didn't care, but I just think there was a heightened level of care where people are like, oh wow, like thanks for having me on, or thanks for inviting me. And they would kind of give us not pointers, they would give us like feedback about our conversations, and we didn't really get that in 2019. So I mean, look, it could have been the year, it could have been where we were, in our podcast journey at that point. But I did get a sense that like more people were grateful to be on, and we also had like more requests to come on, which was really cool. But again, that could obviously just be that we've just grown. So I don't know. I can't really attribute that to COVID, but it could have been even both things.
I mean, you're right though. It is actually
Yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah, you're
Like
right.
think
Yeah,
about Andy. Right, like think about Andy, right? The fact that, and this is like a backstory that a bunch of people obviously don't know, because I mean, if you're not in our lives, you wouldn't have known that this happened.
insider knowledge,
Right,
insider
right, right.
information.
Right. So Andy Norman, right? It was super, and I was like, wow, Andy's like really happy that we had him on, like amazing, right? And then so, Alan, your mom had the fall that day. You weren't able to make it on the show. This
You
was, I
weren't
think,
supposed to say that. I'm just
This
kidding.
was,
I'm just
yeah,
joking.
this was like at some point in June. And then so, Andy, who came on our podcast anyway, he seemed to have really enjoyed it and have been really great, been really grateful and really empathic. And he's like, hey man, like, I would love to come back on whenever, Alan's ready. And, maybe somewhere at the end of whatever it was, like fall, by the end of the year, we could do a second appearance. And like, yeah, that was really cool. And I was like, wow, like this guy was really grateful to have had, and this is a person who's been on the Michael Shermer show and Joe Rogan. So I was like, wow, like, he was grateful to, have had the invite. And you kind of get that from a few people. Tom Morris also comes up. He was super grateful to have been invited. So look, I don't know if it's COVID. Maybe it's probably just a mixture of things, obviously. But I wouldn't be surprised if at least not the lack of, but the diminished level of intimacy that people have had over the past years has literally made at least some of our guests be like, oh my God, like, wow, here are these people who want to talk to me. Thank you.
You know, I'm with you on that. Yeah, like those people definitely express gratitude. And I guess on the other hand too, if I had to really stop and think about it, yeah, I would say I'm very grateful that, they came on, of
Mhm.
course. Um, I don't stop because you get caught up in the, as I love to say, the automaticity of things. It's just like a phrase I like to say. But I mean, it's true. If I really stop to think about it, I mean, imagine that we didn't have the podcast, right? Just remove that from your life and
Mhm.
then keep everything else. Do you feel like it's enriched your life in any
Oh,
way?
100%, man. Yeah. So, I mean, like, look, I love our friends, obviously, but like, I feel like just it's not enough. Like, I know there's this like, sort of dichotomy between like whether you should be successful or, whether you should more so focus on your relationships. But I really do think most people are unhappy, like, if they have one or the other. Like, I've known a bunch of people who are like family people and, who had some significant, like, stable friendships. And they're like, oh, wow, like, this is kind of all that life has to offer. I mean, it kind of feels like it sucks, right? But then you also have the other extreme where you have somebody who's like, zeroed in on success and they don't have any relationships. So, but I feel like for us and what we're doing, what was really cool is that we obviously kept our close friendships and, we kept those intimate relationships. And then on top of that, yeah, we had this thing that, I think to a substantial degree really got us through COVID, man. It gave us something significant to look forward to over those weeks.
Yeah, if I really had to think about it, oh my God. Oh, it would be so bad. Yeah, without the podcast, I mean, it would be
And
just a lot of,
Sundays too. Like, what do you do on a Sunday, right?
I mean, okay, I've actually always been pretty good at finding a way to amuse myself,
No, yeah,
as
yeah,
far
I'm
as,
sure, but it's not the same, right? Yeah, yeah. So you're just pretty much. I mean, okay, let's not call it killing time, but you're doing something of lesser quality, right?
well, it's cool because this is just a really sort of meaningful thing. Again, when you just stop to think about it. Sometimes I get caught up, right? And I'm sure to some degree it's the same for you. Like when we do the show every week,
Hmm.
sometimes it's sort of you're preparing for the guest and you want it to be good and you want to just go over the material if there is material to go over and all that kind of stuff. And usually right after we get finished every time with a guest, that's when I'm always like, wow, okay, that was good, right?
Hmm.
Then other times, because again, so automatic, you
Hmm.
forget like, oh yeah, this might be helping somebody, right? If they're listening, it might be helping yourself too, because you're also getting um I don't know, either reacquainted with information you already once knew, or maybe you're learning some sort of a different nuance or a different sort of take on a subject.
Right, right.
um I mean, Tom Morris, for example. mm, what I liked about the experience with Tom Morris, it's not even what I can remember from the interview. It's sort of how I felt in
Yeah,
terms of
his energy was on point.
his energy was contagious, and many of our guests have really good energy, great energy.
Mhm.
But why I'm singling him out in particular is I remember finishing that podcast and just feeling sort of mm, inspired to sort of get back on the horse,
Mhm.
like get back to, like okay, I was already going to gym, but like being a little more disciplined, like before COVID, not like okay, now that I'll connect it to COVID, right?
Mhm.
I if I didn't have the podcast, I think I'd be uh in sort of a worse sort of a place, because I'd be less I might be less motivated in general. And then
Yeah,
maybe that would pour into other aspects of my life.
yeah.
But but yeah, right. Let's just stick to one point. Tom Morris was very inspiring and made me want to sort of um, up my game, so to speak. You know?
Yeah, and to speaking of Tom Morris, and I mean, I want to add on. It's not just him, obviously, about in terms of what I'm about to say. So it's not just him, but I feel like people. Well, I want to say first him. I don't want to just say people like him because that kind of devalues it. But the fact that he gave us such great feedback. So the way I kind of think about it is, I remember when we first started the podcast, like I was super camera shy, right? Even still, to a pretty great extent, I am. Like I hate being on camera. It's not my thing. It's just I get really anxious, right?
I don't like
So
it either.
yeah, yeah. So, but when you get somebody like Tom Morris who comes in, and this is a guy who obviously we really respect, and he gives you such great feedback about like what his experience was like, what he was expecting. He learns your names. You're like, wow, man, like this is really something that I could like that we could do, right? Like this is something legitimate for us. So what I love the most honestly about the podcast is the growth and confidence for the both of us. The fact that like in the beginning we really just, we kind of took our shots and we're like, okay, whatever, let's just see where this goes. And then based on not every guest obviously is going to give you great feedback, which is fine. I mean, look, some guests are going to be like, hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. That's fine. I mean, we don't ask for more. We don't need more, right? But when you have like the guests who really like, give you like this like over the top level of feedback, you're like, holy shit, like we're on the right path here. And I could just kind of like look back on, 2019 and then 2020 and this year and think like, man, just the fact that like we got such better feedback over the years, like in terms of, again, the episodes, what we provided for the guests, what we got out of them, that it kind of makes me think like, yo, I don't know if I would have had the same degree of confidence just in myself. Forget about even just an interview or just in myself without the show, especially this past year.
I would say so. Yeah. I think it's just from the repetition, the practice, right? I
Now,
feel like,
that's an aspect. That's an aspect. I don't think that's the whole thing.
yeah, it's definitely not the whole thing. That's definitely as far as for me, just being able to do it every week or almost every week. I've
The
just become
discipline.
more comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I remember, so it still happens to some degree, but to a lesser extent. But I would get so nervous, right, before a podcast because I just want it to be so good, and I want the
So
start to
perfect.
be perfect,
Yeah.
And I feel like the beginning is the most important thing, right?
Which is interesting.
Well, only because, okay, well,
But
imagine
wait,
you
wait,
turn
can you
something
tell your
on.
story? Can you tell your story? Let's not go off topic.
That's my story.
No, 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 no. What you were gonna say? What did you used to do?
I got nervous before, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we practiced, right?
Yeah.
And I got better at it. You got better at it. And there's just more of a sense of professionalism to it, I suppose. I mean, this is something that we just kind of are doing from like sort of, from our homes, right? But still, when you practice enough, you gain a certain level of competence,
Yeah.
and you start to know what you're doing or appear as if you know what you're doing, which is fine because it's like driving a car. When you first begin driving a car, you're checking the lights, you're checking this, that. Not that you normally don't, but there are things that you start to become intuitive
Mhm.
as you go through the processes over and over again. So I
Right.
feel like there's certain things that now come to us intuitively, and that there's sort of another level of maybe things that we're learning now,
Mhm.
but it's not the same things we were learning at the beginning. And so
Right.
we're just progressively, getting better and better, which
Mhm.
is cool.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know what I
that's it.
like what I like the most like about what we try to do is that we try our best like to take these interviews and make them something other than what the other get what are our not other guests. So we try to make them something other than what our guests have been doing with other podcasts. So like I really like that. And I like how how we had that episode with Andy and he's like, oh wow, like the other podcasts I've been on have not like, made the discussion like so heavily philosophical. And we did that. So I kind of appreciate that, what we try to do, I think creatively, which is super important, is we try to make these episodes unique. And we try our best, obviously, not to copy other podcasts, which is like, I think in the beginning we did that a lot, which is fine. You try to kind of appeal to a general audience, but I think we kind of learned somewhere down the road that it's actually better to find a way, like I don't know, maybe not niche, but to find like your own sort of unique spin on these conversations.
Okay, so yeah, I'm with you. I wouldn't say that every single interview that we've done is entirely
No,
unique.
totally. Yeah,
No, no,
yeah, yeah.
no.
But
Just to be fair, I don't
yeah,
want to be that guy
no,
who's like,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, we
everything
have
we do
no,
is
no,
unique.
we have to. Yeah, yeah. We have to talk about the
Joking.
actual broad ideas in the books, right? So no, totally. Yeah. So
No,
I
no,
don't.
but definitely, I mean, yeah, we build uh, a relationship with the guest throughout the time with us, and then I feel like there's a certain I don't know what the term is, but it's like a certain sweet spot, let's say,
Mhm.
that we sort of hit. And then all of a sudden, a sort of momentum comes up where all of a sudden or, there's an impulse for you to speak and provide something to the conversation. And for me too. And then for the guest as well. And it starts to become uh, intuitive the way the conversation takes place. But I feel like, depending what it is, sometimes at the beginning, we will go with, a rote sort of a question, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. And well, actually, one thing I like
You
that
know
we do.
what we're doing? We're talking, and creating. Okay.
Whoa, where'd you get that from? That sounds like a book. You should write it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, shout
I'm
out
not
to
proud
Ryan
of that.
Stelzer and David Brendel and their new book, Think Talk Career.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one thing I really like that you do, especially. It's just you actually who does this, which is you'll start out by sometimes reading a passage or a quote or something that you liked from the guest's work, depending who the guest is. And I don't think a lot of people do that, actually. That's a cool way to sort of that is unique. Like, no,
Michael Shermer. No,
he
that's
does
where I
that.
got it from. Yeah, Michael Shermer does that. Yeah, so he'll literally. So I don't know if he starts. So here's where I guess maybe my spin on it, if it is one. I don't. So I may be the one who starts the show with a quote because I'm not sure Shermer does that, but he definitely reads a bunch of passages from people's books. Yeah, and then he'll ask them like questions based on those passages. Unfortunately, I can't take credit for that. But you
Fine.
learn. You learn.
But still, it's cool. Okay, sorry. Let's take a step back.
Mhm.
It's an interest in what they're doing, and
Right.
it's usually not going to be the same. I mean, if it's a whole book and you're choosing from like something that you liked, generally speaking, it's still going to be unique in that sense. So,
Yeah,
you
because
know,
it's my decision certainly. But yeah, I like that so much because first of all, it gets the person to know, and I guess this is podcasting 101 for anybody listening. So it gets the person to realize, like, number one, you read their work, number two, you enjoyed their work, and number three, you actually have something to say about it. I think that builds rapport right off the bat.
you should write a
Go ahead.
book called Podcasting 101.
Podcasting 101. How do you start a podcast?
I don't know, but I
Yeah,
like how you had step 1, step 2, step 3. I want to buy your
yeah, man.
book already.
And you know what's funny, man? People really think like this stuff is easy, and it really takes a toll on you. I mean, not to get into this obviously too much, or maybe we can. I don't know.
Oh,
Podcasting is
yes.
hard.
Oh, I know one person who you
Hmm.
know as well. Uh, but not okay. Well,
But
I
just
know
what's
somebody who
the
you don't
person?
know very well. You don't know
Okay,
them very well, but I
okay.
know them decently. And
What
they
do they
told
say?
us that they were going to be starting a podcast.
Hmm.
And they told us this a year ago
Oh,
or
yeah, yeah.
more.
I know who you're talking
And then they said, but you don't know them very well. I know them very well.
about.
So that's a good way to throw it off.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, moving forward. So yeah, they were like, oh, I just have to buy the right equipment. And then when I get all this correct equipment and then get these other things that need to be done, out of the way first, then I'll begin. And I remember saying at the time, and I'm not an expert, and I was even less of somebody who can speak about this at the time, but I felt that you just have to start. You can't wait for things to be perfect. You have to just begin and then sort of autocorrect. Otherwise, if you're waiting for circumstances to be perfect,
Right.
they may never be perfect according to your standards.
Yeah, and like think about it. How many times do we beat ourselves up for mistakes that we made? So it's like technical mistakes, like flubs that we've said and made on air. I mean, like this is inevitable, man. Like, yeah, so if you're looking for whatever that is, like technical perfection, or even just, I don't know, your interview skills to be stellar, again, whatever that even means, it's never gonna happen, man. Like we're constantly trying to figure out like what we did wrong,
Yeah,
technically,
shit
especially.
happens. Yeah,
Hmm.
like like somebody, I don't know who this person was, but they recorded 5 minutes of an Eric Adams interview.
No, 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 no. It was two and a half.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Even
Two and a
worse,
half
even
minutes.
worse. I wish we got 5 minutes. No, but that
Yeah,
wasn't
that was
anybody's
rough.
fault. That was actually nobody's fault technically. I mean,
Oh, it
nobody.
wasn't anybody's fault.
No, our system has legit
Not at
never shut
all.
down. Never shut down before. But that is
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, it's nobody's fault. Like nobody that we know of. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But
No, but I
yeah.
gotta say though, there is a part of me though that kind of wishes that we had just like better, not only just tech savvy, but we had just better equipment and better, whatever. Just like in terms of the way it's put out. Like obviously, look, we don't make any money off of this
Oh
decision.
yeah, thumbnails,
Yeah,
the
everything.
right
Yeah,
titles, the right
yeah,
algorithm.
look, because I got okay here. Now I could share this with you since we're on air. We could talk about it. So obviously we had like the episode where that you weren't on with Jeff Jarrett, and yeah, man, that was a little bit embarrassing for me because Jeff has a like full like pretty much. I mean, he doesn't have a studio per se, but he has a whole setup, right? So he has this whole great setup, and then on top of that, they have really great visuals. Their clips are really great, and just everything is put out super professionally. And I'm like, damn, man, we're like fucking amateurs compared to this. So, I had a little bit of I guess, I don't know, an issue with confidence there because I was like, damn, man. I was like, here's Jared. He comes with this great setup, this podcast. I mean, obviously, they make money off of it. So I get it. I mean, it's not just for free, it's on ad free shows. It's not even his podcast technically. I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, like they get paid for it. So,
Mhm.
but, when you compare and you're like, damn, man, I was like, we are not on that level. Holy shit. And that kind of sucked. Yeah.
Well, I would say this. Mm, depends. If you look at different podcasters and the environments they have set up, yes,
Mhm.
some of them have a Jeff Jarrett style.
Legit.
Some of them have a Brad Johnson style. Some of them have a Diamond Dallas Page style
Yeah, but remember,
background.
wait, but here's the thing. This is why this is not fair. So with Brad and DDP, they don't have podcasts, so they just come to interview, right? But Jeff actually has a podcast. That's why I'm like, so like if we had DDP on, there's nothing to compare it to. Like he doesn't have a podcast. But then when I'm sitting here and I'm talking to Jeff, I'm like, damn, man. I was like, yo, I really feel like I have to step up here.
I know what you mean. I mean,
Hmm.
I had those feelings that you're talking about
Yeah.
for the first half of us doing our podcast.
Hmm.
Because yeah, in terms of background, it's all right. I mean, what we have the books in the background here,
Yeah.
right? But I've seen all kinds of podcast studios as far as that
Yeah.
goes.
And they look super
Um,
cool.
awesome,
Yeah.
super
Yeah.
awesome.
Hmm.
Different sorts of setups, different kind of cameras and things of that nature. Um, but I feel like again, how I mentioned earlier, there are things that we sort of learned, and then they're intuitive, and then there's like another stage. I feel like we're building towards probably gearing to shift other ways that we do things as far as that
I
goes.
would hope. Yeah, I would hope.
No, I wouldn't. No, we wouldn't allow it to plateau. Otherwise, we'll get too
Right.
upset and yeah, I don't know. I don't think we would allow it after a certain point. There's going to be
Right,
a
right,
point
right.
where you just hit a sort of a critical mass, and yeah, somebody riding motorcycles back there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the neighborhood,
That's cool.
man. Which is funny too, because it's like 30 degrees outside, so that's fine.
Oh man, I love the cold. I don't know if you're into Wim Hof or anything like that, but I used to love a good cold plunge.
No. Oh God, no.
But
But
anyway,
yeah,
we can
but yeah,
move from that.
no, but you know what it is? It's like the uncertainty of it, right? Because like you see, like, but here's the thing again, not a fair comparison. Jeff Jarrett obviously has a stellar, reputation, fan following, so I get it. It's much easier for him to find find a suitable partner to podcast with. Well, I mean, the business relationship. So, but yeah, man. But even still, like, you look at other podcasts and you're like, holy shit, man. You're like, okay, when is it going to be our turn?
I would say this, realistically speaking, um, the whole world of podcasting is incredible because you take away certain gatekeepers from
Right.
you and from the world,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's awesome. So I don't know. I feel like in terms of the amount of obstacles that we have to overcome versus how many obstacles our predecessors had to overcome
Right.
in order to um, get a foothold on this or get some sort of success in this area, it's not the same. So yeah, I also, so I don't know. I feel like it's just a matter of trial and error, um, consistency, and then making sure to just implement new things and just not be lazy about it or not be too resistant to that
Yeah, the
new
uncertainty, man.
change.
That's what it usually is. It's the uncertainty. It's like, oh, because you don't know where it's going. I mean, obviously, at this point, it could go anywhere. So good or bad. So the thing is, like, when you don't know where it's going, you're like, shit. Like, how much of my time is this really worth? Like, I don't want to like fail, and I don't want to get rejected. Obviously, you're kind of always asking other people to come on, and then like, you kind of look at view counts, and you're wondering who's watching. Does anybody really care? So it's like a lot, man. So I know this is definitely a first world problem, obviously, but I think the thing that like people don't get with podcasting is like it's not just the physical stuff. Well, it's not even physical per se, but it's not just like the toll that comes with activity, right? Where you're reaching out to people, you're preparing for shows, you're reading the work, you're just thinking through like the questions you're going to ask, research maybe that you're doing, right? It's not just that. It's literally you're now also fighting the fear of failure and rejection, and you're constantly trying to push yourself, reminding yourself, okay, some of this shit has worked, some of it hasn't worked. So let me now keep focusing on the stuff that has worked in order to motivate myself to move forward.
I
That's
mean,
hard.
yeah, I'm with you. No, I agree with you. There's times that like when we've taken breaks, let's say,
Yeah.
where I felt like I really needed it to sort of, for some reason, I don't know. It's not like we do too much time as far as an hour on Sunday, plus or
That's not
minus.
all though.
I
Yeah,
know,
that's
I
actually
know
all
the
of the
extra
work that goes.
preparation
Yes, and on top of
and
that, all
guests.
the work and releasing the episodes, sharing the episodes, right? Like pretty much uploading it. It all takes time.
Yeah. So, for example, when we had time off and there was that extra resource of time,
Hmm.
um, there was a few things that were valuable at the time. One was just having more time to get back to just my own interests, right? In terms of what would I just naturally like to learn? What would I naturally like to watch? Would I like to
Right.
do nothing, right? And there was a value to that, especially in the doing nothing.
Hmm.
The times when I did nothing, I thought, oh, actually, I dislike doing nothing more than how hard it is to keep up with the podcast, let's say, or something like that.
Hmm.
That's a little aspect of it. Another aspect of it was I just kind of started to remember again why I'm doing what I'm doing instead of getting caught in
Yes, the
the
automaticity.
automatic the automatic nature. I didn't want to say automaticity again.
Yeah, yeah.
But speaking to what you said before, I just looked this up on the Guardian, an article where it shows the top 5 regrets of people of the dying, right?
Okay.
So
Not having a podcast.
so a lot it's true, that's actually the number one regret. No, just kidding for the audience, but one of them is I'd wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me,
Yeah.
right? So for example, for me personally speaking, doing a creative sort of pursuit like the podcast, that to me counts as something that I was incredibly afraid to do, incredibly afraid of what people would think, imposter syndrome, you name it, like all sorts of things coming at me in terms of obstacles. But choosing to sort of pursue that, it helped me to feel like, okay, I don't want there to be any regrets at the end of this. Like, what's the point if there's 24 hours in a day, and I could either live in reaction and just let things happen to me and live as a no, as Nietzsche would say, live as a no to life, and
Yeah.
then still have things happening, or I can be proactive, be what's called the nobleman, if I remember correctly, in Nietzsche's writing, and choose to make my own decisions as often as I can, right? And make some sort of a difference. So there's that. There's other regrets too. Like I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings,
Yeah.
right? I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends,
Mhm.
and I wish that I let myself be happier. So, I mean, that's incredibly important, right? I mean, having the courage to express your feelings, for
Right.
example. A lot of people want to hide their feelings or don't want to go beyond a certain step with their friends because it's too much of a vulnerable obstacle for them to go past. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe I'm being too general,
Well, yeah,
Does that
I'm
need an
wondering,
explanation?
are we doing this in the context of podcasting, or this is just broadly speaking?
No, I meant broadly speaking, right? I mean, for example, some people might not get to a certain level of intimacy, or in terms of, let's say, problem solving with friends,
Mhm.
which we talked a little bit about with David Brendel, right? Where sometimes when you solve an issue with your friends, sometimes that makes your friendship stronger.
Right.
Well, some people might alternatively try to hide their feelings or repress what they're feeling towards their friend,
Mhm.
and then maybe let certain things build up and then not confront it. But then the next slight that occurs, or imagined slight, depends, but it could be a real slight too.
Mhm.
That could end up being the thing that sort of brings down that friendship or relationship, where otherwise, if everybody had just expressed their feelings every step along the way, all those things that sort of built up,
Mhm.
they wouldn't be as there wouldn't be such a of an intensity when an issue comes up, if that
Right.
makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. No, totally.
Yeah, yeah. And why'd I bring up the dying thing? Yeah, yeah, I do definitely relate it to podcasting, because being able to sort of express yourself here, learn new things, hopefully be offering value to people.
Mhm.
It feels like, just to harken on this point again, it brings a lot of meaning,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
For yourself and hopefully for others too. And I mean, there's a lot of things that we've encountered in terms of issues, like, I don't know, especially politically, let's say, even amongst friends.
Mhm.
um I like this forum, or being able to sort of express that there's a way in a sort of long form fashion
Right.
to sort out through different perspectives and try to integrate them and sort of come to an answer where both you and the person with that alternative opinion could sort of see eye to eye.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah,
so I
finding
don't
some
know.
sort of resolution. Yeah, and then so yeah, and it's interesting too because like when you're thinking about like creativity and just finding purpose and building some sort of what's called self-efficacy where you feel like a sense of mastery. Do you feel like okay? What do you think of in this hypothetical world, right? What do you think would have happened in terms of the way you saw your kind of ability to provide value to the world and your ability just to feel like you can do something, let's say that's difficult, right? What do you think it would have been like had there not been a podcast?
Uh, well, realistically speaking,
Hmm.
I probably would somehow rationalize, probably for my own good,
Hmm.
just to stay sane,
Hmm.
that perhaps going to the gym or being helpful to my family in whatever sense,
Right.
whenever, or being good to my friends, or today I established this relationship or that relationship, I would honestly probably somehow rationalize that I'm still moving forward in some way.
And you would be.
But and I probably would be, but at the same time, um, if it wasn't because I had an urge to do something along the lines of the podcast for many years before doing the podcast.
Right, right.
And I didn't really act on it. Or if I acted on it, it was such a terrible half step, baby step that didn't really
Yeah.
lead anywhere and wasn't
Hmm.
consistent.
Hmm.
Um, so there would have been still something gnawing at me to act. And the more I probably wouldn't have acted, the more of a gnawing feel, the more that gnawing feeling would build, let's say.
Hmm.
And yeah, that would be probably, I'm guessing, incredibly unpleasant, as
Hmm.
far as that goes.
Yeah. So it's
um
like it's worth all of the anxiety that we feel the night before and obviously the day of before like recording.
oh man, I mean, I think
Mhm.
that there still would be a different level of anxiety. I
Mhm.
think there would be a much, like, a greater sense of and not even, I mean, I feel like the kind of anxiety that we feel is
Mhm.
something sort of resembling eustress, right?
Mhm.
uh, i- I forget the exact definition of eustress, but it's like a positive. If get me wrong, it's a layman expression, but eustress is like a positive
Yeah.
sense of stress, right?
Right. It's
Something
like
like
sort of
that.
like if you have to, it's like if you have to be anxious about something, it's better to be anxious about something like this.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's the point I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no problem. So, okay, so moving forward, that is the point I'm making. So,
Right.
yeah, I would probably feel just terribly anxious, but in a bad way, in terms of like, where is my life headed? I'm not doing the things that I want to do, right?
Right.
I'm not
Like,
sovereign.
like
I'm just,
existentially, right? You're like, oh shit. Like if I have to die today, would I be happy with this?
oh yeah, wow.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh yeah. Well, I guess
Right?
that does tie to that five
Yeah.
regrets of when you die thing. So yeah, I agree with you. It's just interesting. I didn't exactly think of it that way, but that's
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
So I hear you.
yeah.
I love that because, like, what I do sometimes when I get into black and white thinking, right? I sometimes even wonder, I'm like, damn, man, is the anxiety the night before? Like, when there's a guest, like when there's just us two, it's obviously fine. But like, is the anxiety the night before? Is it worth like what we're doing? But yeah, you're right. Like, considering it, like, you're going to be anxious about something. So it's like, if you're not going to be anxious about this, your anxiety is going to worry about your health, it's going to worry about your future, your financial situation, your relationships, whatever. So yeah, no, you're right. I guess it's better to worry about this than something even more serious.
Yeah, and then even then, I mean, I mean, it's not just worry, which I
Mhm,
think we've established. I wouldn't have to really explain that to you,
mhm.
obviously, but just for fun, um, yeah, I mean, there's so many other just great, good feelings that come along with doing the podcast. I mean, in terms of even like the guests that we've had this year, right? I mean, besides recent guests like Tom Morris, David Brendel, Ryan Stelzer, Rachel Softness, Andy Norman. We also had guests like Mike Walrond on, right?
Yeah.
And that's like a guest that normally you wouldn't expect for us to have in terms of let's say a pastor, right?
Right.
But he also kind of like Tom Morris, but in a different sort of sense.
Yeah, he's
He had
actually almost exactly like Tom Morris.
yes, just
He's like, and I was gonna say actually he's like the Christian version of it, but not really. They're both heavily philosophical. So technically he is almost exactly like Tom Morris.
like he said, he's just the Christian version of that. No,
I'm just trying to differentiate them, but honestly, you kind of can't. They're both
no,
heavily philosophical.
but like for example, his story in terms of
Yeah.
being ill his
Yeah.
entire life and having such close calls with death, right? And not knowing if he's gonna live again or if he'll survive for the next year, right?
Right.
And then still sort of having not okay. Here's what's funny. You would think when somebody's telling this story, oh, like I almost want to say just impulsively, he had this unshakable faith, but actually
Right.
no. He told us that he had struggled with that. There were times where it was like sort of oscillating for him, but he still held firm in his beliefs, and that even when he was in incredible pain, and he had sort of quote unquote surrendered to it,
Yeah.
even that you almost understood without being told intellectually even that he had felt in a sense at peace with whatever circumstance would sort of
Right.
befall him, but he got incredibly lucky. And and I don't know, just hearing how somebody deals with incredible pain and sickness and still sort of is able to maintain their a solid sense of a worldview and still be giving to people and still sort of maintain um, a sense of stability, right? Because some people, when they're in incredible pain, they are irritable, right?
Well, yeah,
uh,
they hate the world. Yes.
no, of course, well, of course, but um, please correct me if I'm wrong, or we'll just have to look this up later. But I think a lot of generals in wars who had
Mm,
tooth problems or something like that.
mm.
Uh, not that it led to war. I don't want to say that. That's dumb.
Wait, what?
I'm not gonna say that.
Going.
This is a comedy podcast. No.
Toothaches lead to war, says Alan. Quote. I mean, it
Alan
doesn't
says
go
tooth
that
pain leads to war.
far.
Yeah, this is before Advil. No,
Yeah.
but yeah, a lot of those kinds of people were very irritable,
Right.
And it's incredible when somebody's able to deal with pain like that. I mean, in your interview with Rachel Zoffness, you guys speak on that a
Yeah,
bit
chronic
too,
pain.
right?
Right.
Yeah, and just even moving forward, like even the other guests, for example, James, the two Jameses, James Moreno and James
Yeah.
Shaknovich, and we
Mhm.
talked about addiction. I mean,
Yeah, man.
that was
Wow.
incredibly valuable.
Our guests this year have been through some shit. Yeah. Yeah.
Shermer.
Yeah. There's a theme.
I mean, for us, having Shermer on, I mean, let me put it to you this way. I also have a certain sense of faith when it comes to the podcast in terms of
Mhm.
our consistency and luck meets opportunity and
Yeah.
these kinds of mindsets and thoughts. Sure. But when we had Michael Shermer on, or we knew that Michael Shermer was going to be coming on,
Mhm.
I was a fangirl. I fanboyed,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, oh shit, I know that guy. I
Wow.
really know that guy from,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that guy,
Yeah.
but I know
Well,
that
you
guy.
do. Well, you do know him now.
I know that guy. Yeah. So yeah, but like I had listened to him a lot on Rogan, even with Graham Hancock once
That was
upon a
one of the
time.
best episodes ever. That was literally that 3 hour episode was one of the best. Yo, dude, I was literally we were driving from San Francisco to San Diego, and the entire road was literally 3.5 hours of Rogan, Graham, and I forgot the other guy's name, but all of them. That episode just blew
Carlson,
me away.
maybe Randall Carlson.
Randall Carlson. Yeah. So blew us away, man. I was like, yo, holy shit. And I was like, wow. Now thinking back on it, I was like, yo, if somebody had told me in that car on that day that Michael Shermer would someday be on my podcast with me, I would have been like, what?
Yeah, even
Right?
just to meet the guy, even
Yeah.
just something as simple as that. I mean, for you, especially in terms of, I mean, for me too, actually. Yeah, what do I mean? Just for you, yeah. DDP, for example.
Yeah.
I was like, really? Like, I don't know. When we first got, I was like, DD Diamond Dallas Page for real, and I was like, DDP Yoga Diamond Dallas Page, and yeah, man, like guests like that or Mohamedou.
Yeah.
Right, dude. Yeah, man. I don't remember if I've ever said this on the podcast. I might have said this to you only off air, but to and first of all, let me preface this with incredible story. Somebody who dealt with being a prisoner at Guantanamo Bay and then being proven innocent close to 20 years later, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Many
14.
years later.
14, but yeah.
Pardon, yeah. So and just so here's my point. It was really, so I could empathize with him, but here's this thing for me. When I empathize,
I just wanted to make a joke. I'm so sorry.
What do you want to say?
I was gonna say, oh, when were you in Guantanamo?
No, that's good. Completely valid. Because that actually,
I can feel it. I can feel his pain.
No, check this out. No. So this is gonna bolster my point, which is it's hard to empathize, but to make the attempt to empathize, right? To try to put yourself you can't, but to even attempt to do it was challenging. It was very challenging. A lot of times it's not that hard to establish rapport with people and make that sort of connection. With him, it's not that. So the connection was established in terms of us being able to have a conversation, but trying to process what he went through, just from an empathetic standpoint, was a real challenge. Because a lot of times, a lot of times people won't even make the effort to try to be empathetic, which is why you learn to be empathetic, right? But then even when you know how to be empathetic, I mean, to really take in somebody else's experience when it's like that, that traumatizing is really tough to do. And you could speak more to that as a therapist.
I think what we achieved was what's called cognitive empathy, where we understood what the experiences were, but I don't think we achieved emotional empathy. I cannot put myself in his shoes. I have no idea what that's even like. I understand that, just like reading a book, I'm like, okay, wow, this sounds horrific, but I'm like, can I actually feel it? Like put myself in that scenario? No.
So, right. So I agree with you there. the thing is, instead of even dismissing it at that level, because I did have that thought, which is like, okay, don't even try to, you're not going to,
Yeah,
empathize, like for real. It's not possible. It's too graphic what happened.
right,
But yeah, but even just trying to do that, that was rough. That was
right.
just, yeah. Um, but yeah, Mark Marrow too was cool,
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
far as that goes.
We had a bunch of inspirational people this year, which is interesting because we made such a shift, right? We mostly, I think, the year before were like more so into more intellectually sort of inclined guests, where I think we more so talked about ideas and, like, obviously just, books. I mean, we talked about books this year too, but more so ideas, right? We was more analytical. Whereas this year, I feel like we kind of moved into the experiential territory. We went into, people with like really amazing stories.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, you're right. You're right. Actually, I think tried to stay away from that. In the beginning, we mainly just went for specifically, uh, I believe, just yeah, authors,
Authors, yeah,
professors,
yeah.
um, just straight up philosophers, or
Yeah, yeah. People with
yeah.
great ideas, right? But with not necessarily great stories, right? Or maybe they do, but like we didn't know them. So yeah, people who wrote, like, who were great writers and had a lot to say in terms of like changing the world. But no, I don't think we've had anybody
Oh,
particularly.
I
Yeah.
thought you meant. Sorry to interject, but I thought you meant like, for example, having like Tom Morris, Mark Marrow, or DDP. I thought you meant like in the sense of
No,
just
I mean,
different from the traditional guest.
I
That's what
just
I
mean
thought you were
well,
saying.
yes, I do, but I mean in terms of like the inspirational stories, like the things that they went through. I think the people that we had on the year before were, again, they were very analytical and it was more so focused on ideas. Whereas this year, I think it was more so focused on people's experiences. And obviously, it's not black
More
and
so,
white. I'm not
yes.
saying, yeah, yeah. I think we
Yeah.
really kind of like, kind of branched out into like just literally stories and experiences, which I really like. I mean, I feel like sometimes, you hear these stories and you're like, holy shit, man, like you can't believe that there's so much shit like that happening in the world, good and bad, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, it speaks to the power of narrative to
Yeah,
be also a powerful teaching tool, right? I mean, you could read a book filled with facts in terms of just, this is what confirmation bias is. This
right,
is
right.
what backwards rationalization is. People do this when A happens, this when you react, you know, blah blah blah. I don't have a complete thought there, but you get what I'm saying. Just
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
yeah.
like there's a sort of depth there within the story that literally makes you go, holy shit. Like the Mike story, Mike Walrond, right? Like actually sitting and listening to it and hearing it obviously on our podcast, literally was just mind blowing, man. Like I guess if I read about it, I mean, definitely would have been shocked, right? But just hearing him say it, and you're like, what the fuck? How did all of these things happen to this guy?
Yeah, it leaves a sort of emotional impact
Yeah,
where it sort of cements the idea of different ideas, actually. One, in terms of just being grateful for your health, generally
yeah,
speaking. Grateful that it's possible that if you ever did encounter some level of incredible pain, it is
yeah.
possible to sort of maintain your stability, sort of sense of stability.
And sense of hope. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe not be too incredibly um I want to say too incredibly changed by it. Actually, I'm probably wrong there.
Mhm.
But it is interesting. It is interesting how his story sort of starts to make you think about several different things at once, in terms of just your relationship to your health, to family, what's important to you.
Yeah,
Um,
and then also the fact
yeah.
that you don't even have it as bad as you think you do.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So if you think your problems are big, get bigger problems, as a
Mm,
certain saying goes, right?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that, and just, I don't know. I would say, oh yeah, Ashley. We had Ashley. Oh yeah, Brian Maresco,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is cool.
that's technically last year. That was in December,
Is
but
it?
yeah.
It says 11 months here.
Oh, because you're looking at it through YouTube. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's probably 11 months because yeah, because it's
YouTube is stupid.
no, no,
Screw you, YouTube.
because it's November. That's why it's only 11 months. Yeah, you're right. No, it is 11 months because it's not December yet. But it's still in December. Yeah, because I see what you're doing. You're like, oh, if it's 11, actually, is it? Yeah, it is 11. Yeah, because it hasn't, it's in November. It's not December. Yeah, so it's 11. Whatever. But yeah, point is, yes. So Brian was a great one, even though it was last year. But Ashley was cool too. Yeah, Ashley, and Ashley was like in that thread of like, intellectual conversation. So that was cool. It was nice that we had like somebody on who was actually an expert in
and
Marxism.
and we got interviewed too, which was
Yeah.
interesting experience. Yeah.
Also last year, yes. Also in December.
Okay, but then that next interview with her happened in January,
True, true, true.
which is in January and not December. Shit, you're right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh well.
But you know
Whatever.
what's cool?
I'm squeezing.
What I like that we do is that we find like other people with podcasts too. So it's like we can like, I mean, not necessarily that we're coming on their podcast, but I like that it's that you have people who really know and have a deep understanding of what your experience is like, right? You have Jeff Jarrett with his own podcast, Emily Kircher Morris with the Neurodiversity podcast. So cool to have her back on. And then who else? Obviously Michael Shermer with the Michael Shermer Show. And
Helen
then it's like,
DeCruz,
well, she does not have a podcast.
but she was cool anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And then, obviously Martha Lawn with the Squander and Lust podcast. So it's like, yeah, it's really cool to have like other podcasters on. I really do appreciate that. Just the fact that like, again, you have like people who really know what your experiences are like.
Yeah, and I guess we're actually pretty much an hour, but I'll just add one more thing, which was interesting in terms of Helen, and I think it was Christopher Mark Rose. I don't see it on my screen here, but I'm just going off memory.
Mhm.
Yeah, where we talked about science fiction stories and sort of, an example of maybe what a future utopia / dystopia might look like. And it's interesting, especially with the advent of meta, right?
Mhm.
With the whole, we're creating the matrix essentially. Although I would say we sort of already have a meta reality in the sense of, in terms of social media. No.
Alan, that is a topic for another day, my friend.
Oh, well, real quick. I promise.
Sure.
So I just like how stories like that make you think about different paths that we can take in terms of technology and the goings on of life and things of that nature. So it's incredibly interesting how the power of narrative and science fiction can sort of help you to think about the future too. And that was just sort of the point I was going to, finish off with there.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, this was a cool one. I mean, it's, for our audience, these are pretty much the conversations that me and Alan have behind the scenes, literally every single time we hang out and meet each other. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of cool that they got I guess this would be called a sneak peek into our lives.
This felt like a podcast. Does that make any sense? You ever heard like a comedy podcast before?
No, but like what?
No. Well, okay. Well, I guess Rogan sort of counts, but you ever heard Rogan with like his comedian friends on or whatever?
Yeah, we're just shooting the shit, right?
Yeah, it feels like that. Like we're just kind of shooting the shit, being a little meta, talking about the show and all that. But there's more of a
but this is like
intuitive process going on.
And this is legit what our conversations are like for the most part. I mean, outside of like the whole, I think 10 minutes that we had of COVID, just because like we were through COVID together, we didn't need to talk about our experiences of it. But like the other parts are literally just stuff that we would talk about regularly.
Fine, fair enough. I thought at the COVID beginning was fine, just sort of.
No, I'm not. That's not even a criticism. I'm not. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just.
But you're right. You're right. We got into a different kind of flow.
Yeah. What I'm just saying is that like COVID is cool, but that was, I think, like for the audience. But in terms of our experiences, because again, we know what each other's experiences are. I mean, what the fuck, we've been talking for the past year. But the point is that later on, like the conversations that we had about the show, that's actually what we talk about in person.
I'm going to cut a clip later where it's that little second where you just said COVID is cool. Just like post it. No,
edit me. Just give me, make me look like an asshole. Just edit what I'm saying.
All right, guys. If you want to follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Like, subscribe, and actually, yes, hit the bell. Definitely. No. I was about to say
hit the bell.
Yes. Do you remember the TikTok by any chance? It's actually doing pretty well.
It's at Seize the Moment Podcast.
Awesome. At Seize the Moment Podcast on TikTok as well. Guys, it was a pleasure. Have a very happy Thanksgiving and see you next time.